Coast. Good afternoon to those of y'all that are on the East Coast potentially, and maybe good evening to those that are joining us from overseas. As always, we're going to start, intend to start at 11 minutes past the hour. I'm going to give, I know everybody did their homework assignment and listened to Malcolm's full ballot or the bullet speech, but just in case people didn't, I'm going to be playing a few minutes of Malcolm while we're getting situated and getting ready to enter the closing phase of this conversation. So we'll put Malcolm on for the next few minutes. Get your coffee, your tea, if you're get prayed up if you have got a prayer to make, and we'll be ready to go here in about 9 minutes.
Democratic administration in Washington, D.C. The whites were evenly divided. It was the fact that you threw 80% of your votes behind the Democrats that put the Democrats in the White House. When you see this, you can see that the Negro vote is the key factor. And despite the fact that you are in a position to be the determining factor, what do you get out of it? The Democrats have been in Washington, D.C. only because of the Negro vote. They've been down there 4 years. And all other legislation they wanted to bring up, they brought it up and gotten it out of the way, and now they bring up you. And now they bring up you. You put them first and they put you last. Because you're a chump. A political chump. In Washington, D.C., in the House of Representatives, there are 257 who are Democrats. Only 177 are Republicans. In the Senate, there are 67 Democrats. Only 33 are Republicans. The party that you backed controls 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and still they can't keep their promise to you because you're a chump. Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race. And what kind of alibi do they come up with? They try and pass the buck to the Dixiecrats. Now, back during the days when you were blind, deaf, and dumb, ignorant, politically immature, naturally you went along with that. But today, as your eyes come open and you develop political maturity, you're able to see and think for yourself. And you can see that a Dixiecrat is nothing but a Democrat in disguise. You look at the structure of the government that controls this country. It's controlled by 16 senatorial committees and 20 congressional committees. Of the 16 senatorial committees that run the government, 10 of them are in the hands of Southern segregationists. Of the 20 congressional committees that run the government, 12 of them are in the hands of Southern segregationists. And they're going to tell you and me that the South lost the war. Today are in the hands of a government of segregationists, racists, white supremacists, who belong to the Democratic Party but disguise themselves as Dixiecrats. A Dixiecrat is nothing but a Democrat. Whoever runs the Democrats is also the father of the Dixiecrats, and the father of all of them is sitting in the White House. I say it again. You got a president who's nothing but a Southern segregationist. From the state of Texas. They'll lynch you in Texas as quick as they'll lynch you in Mississippi. Only in Texas, they lynch you with a Texas accent. In Mississippi, they lynch you with a Mississippi accent. And the first thing the cracker does when he comes in power, he takes all the Negro leaders and invites them for coffee. to show that he's all right. And those Uncle Toms can't pass up the coffee. They come away from the coffee table telling you and me that this man is all right. Because he's from the South. And since he's from the South, he can deal with the South. And look at the logic that they're using. What about Eastland? He's from the South. Make him the president. If Johnson is a good man because he's from Texas, and being from Texas will enable, if Johnson is a good man because he's from Texas, and being from Texas will enable him to deal with the South, Eastland can deal with the South better than Johnson. Oh, I say, you've been misled. You've been had. You've been took. In Washington a couple of weeks ago, while the senators were filibustering, and I noticed in the back of the Senate a huge map, and on this map it showed the distribution of Negroes in America. And surprisingly, the same senators that were involved in the filibuster were from the states where there were the most Negroes. Why were they filibustering the civil rights legislation? Because the civil rights legislation is supposed to guarantee voting rights to Negroes in those states. And those senators from those states know that if the Negroes in those states can vote, those senators are down the drain. The representatives of those states go down the drain. And in the Constitution of this country, it has a stipulation wherein whenever the rights, the voting rights of people in a certain district are violated, then the representative who's from that particular district, according to the Constitution, is supposed to be expelled from the Congress. Now, if this particular aspect of the Constitution was enforced, why, you wouldn't have a cracker in Washington, D.C. But what would happen? When you expel the Dixiecrat, you're expelling the Democrat. When you destroy the power of the Dixiecrat, you're destroying the power of the Democratic Party. So how in the world can the Democratic Party in the South actually side with you in sincerity when all of its power is based in the South? These Northern Democrats are in cahoots with the Southern Democrats.
We'll start in just a minute. I'm going to take us back just to get these 2 minutes for those that just joined us.
You are in a position to be the determining factor. What do you get out of it? The Democrats have been in Washington, D.C. only because of the Negro vote. They've been down there 4 years. And all other legislation they wanted to bring up, they brought it up and gotten it out of the way, and now they bring up you. And now they bring up you. You put them first, and they put you last. Because you're a chump. A political chump. In Washington, D.C., in the House of Representatives, there are 250...
Round two, closing time. Welcome back into the space. Welcome to the space. I know that there were folks that weren't able to attend yesterday because of various commitments. Welcome in. We're going to go ahead and hit the ground running. You guys have probably, if you've listened to me speak, you've heard me quote that line from Malcolm a number of times with reference to the Democrats. You put them first and they put you last, and that makes you a chump, a political chump. We're going to come back to how we attack those that are still on the Democrat plantation, how we call them off of it, how we highlight for them the contradictions. But Malcolm's rhetoric there is very, very carefully chosen for a specific set of reasons that I want us to return to. In today's session, I have three pretty straightforward goals. The first is to, you guys will help me order the goals. The three goals, in whatever order we approach them, is I want to talk about the strategy of utilizing electoral politics as a tool for liberation, not just the philosophical basis of it and the theoretical basis of it, but actually the practical strategy of it. That's one. Two, especially in as this conversation unfolds, I want everybody in this room that is committed to utilizing electoral politics in this contemporary moment in order to make that intervention, to think collectively and to strategize about how to win in this current moment. This is not an intellectual exercise nor an academic exercise. This is also not a speech where I'm trying to get you guys motivated or to understand things from a particular perspective. This is actually a power build. Day two has to be a power build. And we have to move forward from the conversation today. If you are committed to enacting these liberation principles and expanding this Black radical tradition and utilizing it for our collective liberation, then that creates a set of not just moral incumbencies upon us, but practical incumbencies upon us. It requires that we take action in this moment. The third piece is the one that sort of connects the two, which is to make sure that everybody here in the gathering feels like they have a sound understanding of how we are taking these historical examples and these critical interventions that folks like Malcolm have made, that Kwame Ture has made, that the Panthers have made, that Assata Shakur and Fannie Lou Hamer have made, and how we are applying those in this contemporary moment. So the first part, if I can just propose this, is that since there was a homework assignment, I want to bring y'all into the conversation and hear from y'all what you got out of actually listening to Malcolm break down the power of the ballot and that ballot or the bullet speech. What kinds of questions did you come away with? What kinds of understandings did you come away with that you see as relevant to this practical, to this current moment, to this contemporary moment? Get your coffee ready. I call on people. Yeah, go ahead. Let's that. Yeah. I'll try again.
Can you hear me? Hi, Professor Bush.
I can hear you fine.
Professor Ware, sorry.
You're good.
One of the first things that came to me, he said when he was opening his speech, he said something about, some of you were stolen and brought here. Some of you believe you were brought here in the Mayflower. And I know he wasn't talking to white people when he said that. I was contextualizing it for my husband because he's West Asian. And so I had to explain it to him. And for me, as a Latina, there's a lot of us who believe we came here on the Mayflower, right? So it's like having this conversation over Thanksgiving, because I don't celebrate this holiday, with my aunt, who's a staunch Democrat, a New Yorker. And I had to sit with her and talk to her about why she's a Democrat. I don't understand why. She comes from that Kennedy era.
Yep.
And so having to speak with her, and she's obviously on the same side of history as I am, but even referring to that apartheid state as the name that it goes by, and having to sort of circumvent her thought process. And so for me, it's trying to pull back the layers as to why they believe in the ideologies that they subscribe to once they left their country of origin, right? And so at least for my community, trying to sort of reverse engineer that and trying to find the parallels also between some of the Latin community and their biases that exist within anti-Blackness, and the reason why they don't even support or care to support or listen to people like Malcolm X. Even though she grew up very close to Harlem and everything, it's undoing because the racism in Latin America, and that it matters because that block are the people who are here. The racism looks different than in the U.S., right? The U.S.-centric racism or anti-Blackness looks different than that of Latin America, yet they still hold a resistance towards hearing Black voices. My grandfather was an Afro-Latino, so I don't have that issue, thank God. But I'm trying to, even though most of us are dark, I'm trying to sort of, again, remove them from thinking that they came on the Mayflower. And how do I do that?
Beautiful.
Without fighting them.
or for the so-called Latino community, because you know, like when you're referring, like especially, you know, for example, to Mexican American community, 93% of Mexican Americans are of indigenous ancestry. So when you start referring to yourself as Latino, you're literally taking on the term for
Yes.
the colonizer in precisely the same way that Malcolm would refer to so-called Negroes. Like you're thinking of yourself and constructing your identity in terms that have been dictated by the colonizers. But let's say for the so-called Latino community, let's say that maybe it's not you thought you came over on the Mayflower, but you thought you came over on the Nina, the Pinta, or the Santa
Yeah.
Maria, right? That there is this genealogy of association with colonizers and identification with colonizers. And you see this threaded through the history of racial politics in so-called Latin America around whitening policies, right? That there are like explicit state attempts in virtually every single Spanish-speaking Caribbean or Central or South American polity to explicitly promote policies of whiteness, and there are racial hierarchies. So this takes us to where we were yesterday, which is those internalized narratives. Jason Call, our campaign manager, when I made a post yesterday that was reflecting on our conversations here about how we try to unpack the damage that white supremacy has done to us, and that damage hasn't been uneven because the privilege isn't distributed evenly, but it is universal. It is damage that is done to all of us. That when we try to unpack it, Jason, in his very characteristic, you know, like hardcore lefty fashion, he was like, yeah, kill the cop in your head. Right? You have to
No.
first get rid of the colonizer that you have internalized, that you reproduce. And this is one of the things that I want you to pay attention to this inside Malcolm's ballot or the bullet speech and inside his discourses, because hopefully if I've been a good student, you will see me consistently returning to these same rhetorical points, that there is no liberation possible when you are thinking in the terms that have been dictated to you by your oppressors. So Malcolm says, in another speech, he says, we're not outnumbered, we're only outorganized. And that part's easy to understand, right? There's a kind of populist empowerment message there. But a lot of people think that that's all that Malcolm is saying when he says something like that. But he continues and he says, never let your enemy tell you how many of you there are, which is another now referential level in there. It's not just this statement that we're not outnumbered, we're outorganized. But then it's also, don't let the people that you're fighting be your teachers. So then he continues, never let your enemy tell you how many of you there are. And then he says, never let the man that you are against form your opinions for you. And this takes us to the core of where we ended yesterday, which is that without processes of internal decolonization, that aren't properly speaking political. They're not about a struggle over resources. They're not about policy. They're not political in that sense. They're epistemological. They're in the way that you apprehend and know the world. They're ontological. They're about the way you move and be and exist and feel in the world. And without that internal struggle to reprogram those deep recesses of your thinking, of your consciousness, of your heart, of your soul, or your spirit, then actually liberation is impossible. The biggest advantage that Malcolm had is that when he finally unplugged from the matrix, and it was the nation that unplugged him from the matrix, and he was on the floor of a prison cell reading, right? But when he finally got free in here and in here, then that man owned no real estate inside his being from that point forward. And as soon as that is the case, then you become capable of making your own independent assessments of circumstances. You're no longer being conditioned to accept positions of defeat, which takes me to the core of your question. We have to understand, especially for those of us that are liberal adjacent, especially for those of us that are liberal adjacent, that we need to help guide people out of those pitfalls of consciousness, as much as we have to like guide them towards political interventions, that without a transformation of consciousness, that ultimately all of our efforts at liberation are going to be compromised. And that's one of the reasons why Malcolm also said the media is the most powerful force on the planet. Right? He said that. He said in another narration, he said, um, be careful reading newspapers. They'll have you rooting for the oppressors against the oppressed, because he understood that we're all being constantly subjected to a kind of mental and internal colonization and a conditioning that gets us to be the principal instruments of our own oppression. We stay right where we're told to stay because we can't imagine other realms of possibility outside of the ones that are being narrated for us. We're going to come back to some of those rhetorical strategies if by the second half of today's class, I haven't given you some practical techniques to make that kind of intervention with our liberal relatives or friends or associates, then ask me to do it. I promise you I have them and I'll bring them in, but I want to make sure that I bring other folks into the conversation because you gave us a lot of rich stuff to unpack right off the top. I'll go to Douglas.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. How you doing?
Wa alaikum salam, brother Doug. How you been?
Hey, I've been good. I've been good. Good to hear your voice. Good to see you. No disrespect. Here, I'll turn the camera on because I got to see my brother. Hold on.
Good to
Let me.
see you. And while you're doing this, I'm just gonna put I'm gonna put Doug on the spot and embarrass him. But my second academic book, The Jihad of the Pen, which is about how West African Sufi scholars became the principal revolutionary figures in West African history, was largely brought about by an interview that I did with Doug for his radio show in Chicago years ago, where he asked me like one of the most brutal questions that anybody has ever asked me. He was asking about Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, the great Senegalese resistance leader and Sufi thinker, who is in many ways as much my hero as Malcolm is. You guys just don't have as much framework, so I don't talk about him as much in these settings as I do in Muslim community settings. And he asked this simple question. He said, "It's obvious that Ahmadou Bamba has done everything for you. What have you done for Ahmadou Bamba?" Which was hard to hear, but it was coming from a loving brother. So I took my medicine, and that's when I resolved to translate Bamba's writings and make them accessible to a broader public audience, and to try to put a lot of those core teachings, those spiritual teachings that were rooting West African resistance to white supremacy, to capitalism, and to imperialism in a format that other people could access them. So the book Jihad of the Pen was largely, brought about because, like Doug was not ashamed to put me on the spot. I'm sure he's going to do something similar today. We'll see where this goes.
You know, you know me, brother.
I
Man, it's
do.
so good to see you, brother. It's so good to see you, man.
The
We
pleasure's
miss
mine,
you.
man.
Zach told me the next time I see you to give you his salam. So
Alaikum
salam from
salam.
brother Zach.
Salam.
Yeah, one of your murids. So I'm on here because one, I'm a big fan. I'm a loving brother. The other thing is, I would like to rephrase the question. It's
Please.
not the Democratic plantation, it's the plantation of white supremacy, white violence. Because all politics in America is connected to white supremacy, white violence. So I just want to get that straight. You can be a
You
Republican.
will not get any argument out of me or anyone in the cipher on that point, for sure.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's just the truth.
Yep.
We see it every day.
Yep.
Um, and with that being said, Sheikh Malcolm, he was talking he was talking to us as Black people.
Yep.
And one of the things that I've seen in my old age, now I just turned 57 this month. One of the things that I've noticed is everyone uses our playbook, especially on the left, the progressive left. They all use the Black playbook to get what they want.
Yep.
And we're still left out in the cold. What about us? So when you want to talk about appropriation,
Hmm.
cultural appropriation, I have seen how black, not just black bodies, but black political thought, black philosophical thought, and physical black action has been used to get every group that is marginalized their rights.
Yep.
Now, in your state, in California, too bad I'm not in California, because otherwise, I'd be on your staff. But, they had a reparations bill that was undermined by their own black politicians.
Yeah, of course.
And the white black governor, supported it and stood up for them. So I say this to say, I voted for you when you and Jill Stein ran for president, and I tacitly support the Green Party here in Illinois, although it's full of Democratic ops. So the Green Party here in
That's
Illinois
true of the
is,
Green that's true of the Green Party everywhere. We can
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about
I
that more
mean,
later, but continue.
so there are Democratic operatives. It's been the Green Party here in Illinois has been infiltrated, and it works. It's not even really a Green Party. It's just a Democratic Party masquerading as a Green Party. But with that being said, I you know, I am tired of black people, singing gospel songs and, someday, one day, just keep on pushing. You know, I'm tired of that. I'm tired of black people stepping to the side and watching everybody else advance. And well, if one win, we all win. No, no, we don't all win because I'm still being killed by the police.
Yep.
I'm still living. I'm still at the bottom
Yep.
in this country. So with that being said, I know you have a black agenda, but does the Green Party have a black agenda?
Excellent.
A anti-black hate crime bill, reparations, real black representation.
Yep.
So, I get like we have our liberal progressive buddies who like to show up. And Malcolm talked about this. I mean, if you listen to his speaks, he always said that the person who controls the black community was who?
Is the white liberal.
Thank you. So, at this point, I'm done with allies. I'm done with that. I don't want allies anymore. I want family. If I'm
Excellent.
getting arrested, you getting arrested.
Not
And
only
if
that,
I'm getting arrested,
you need
I
to get
want you
arrested. You
bailing
need
me
to get
out.
arrested. You need to get arrested first because because some of us ain't never getting out. They gonna throw us under the jail or throw away the key. So
Mhm.
as always, Doug never fails to deliver as promised because that's just how my good brother in Islam and my good brother in African America 10 toes down rootedness. That's just how he rolls. So thank you for blessing us with the question. I'm gonna give you a couple of answers just in sequential order. The first
Sure.
piece is about the Green Party. And this is an important question that everybody needs to understand. I was asked this by Tavis Smiley in a radio interview when he asked about Cornel West and Cornel West's issue with the Green Party, and basically Cornel West suggesting that the Green Party has a white supremacy problem. And to be honest, we were verging on that conversation yesterday. Like that was part of what was embedded in the conversation that we were having yesterday. So it's very important that Doug raised this at the outset. And my answer was of course the Green Party has a white supremacy problem because the Green Party is a political party in the United States of America. The same way that I said that Steve Biko understood that there was no way to simply excise the broader problems of racial prejudice, anti-blackness, and racism inside the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, neither is there a simple way to excise white supremacy from any of our political movements. So the first thing is you need to be honest and clear about the fact that this is a fundamental problem that is at the core of every single political organization in the United States of America, period, full stop. Green Party is no exception to this. Second piece of this is that the Green Party, despite the fact that it has to fight with white supremacy in the same way that all of these other political institutions have to grapple with it, has nonetheless run on reparations for the Black community since 2006, has run on land back for indigenous communities since also the early 2000s. So with respect to all of the restorative justice and repair specifically for Black people, anti-carceral state legislation, all of the things that are necessary to get the knee off of our neck first, because Malcolm was the one that said it. If you have a knife in my side 9 inches, you pull it out 6, that ain't progress. The progress would be to remove it entirely and then treat the wound. There is no healing or repair for Black communities when the harm is ongoing. It's like healing with one hand while you're actively stabbing with the other. So the Green Party has had the right policies for those things, but the Green Party has never been a Black people's party. It has never been a Black people's party. And it's important that we are clear about that and understand that. And when I was invited to run by Dr. Jill Stein, Jason was on that call. I said, listen, while I consider this invitation to run as a vice presidential candidate, you guys need to consider what you're asking and run tape on me. That's what I told him. I said, you need to run tape on me because I'm not going to change either in the messaging or the orientation. And I said specifically that if you invite me into this position of visible vocal authority inside the party, then you are going to make it the red, Black, and green party. That it is going to be explicitly driven by a Pan-Africanist revolutionary Black liberation agenda, period. And Jason Call said, we know, that's why we're asking you. So the Green Party has every last one of those problems, but the Green Party is aware of those problems and seeking to try to resolve them. Is that going to be a clean process? No, for a variety of reasons, it's not going to be clean. You put your finger on another one of them. The Green Party has been systematically infiltrated by Democratic operatives, and it's the reason why operational security is my principal concern and preoccupation. There are stories that I will go to my grave with for things that happened just in the 10 weeks that I was on the presidential campaign. Directly attacked in the most heinous of form by undercover, deeply embedded operatives inside the party. And when I talk about self-defense, one of the biggest things that I reproach my heroes, the Panthers, for is that they tended to conceive of self-defense as being about carrying weapons and being armed, but it was operational security that undid effective Panther movements. That is the most important form of self-defense. So on those first 2 points, couldn't agree more, fully aware. And the last thing that I'll just say in direct response to your question, and I'm just going to be blunt about this, and I'll also tell something that may be useful for you guys to hear. When Dr. Jill and I did an event with Chris Smalls recently, this maybe was about 6 weeks ago, labor action in Washington, D.C. I was driving Dr. Jill back to where she was staying with some friends. So we had another chance to catch up and to talk. And the thing that she has told me on, I don't know, a half dozen separate occasions since the election is the version of these exact same words. And these were the exact words that she said to me that day. She said, I can't tell you how gratifying it is to be able to pass off decades of work to somebody like you. Jill has been fighting and banging to try to facilitate the demographic change that everybody in the Green Party knows is needed. And there's no way around that problem. It's just the thing that we have to fight. And it's going to come with all of the growing pains that are going to be associated with having, aging white environmentalists and aging white leftists have to learn to like share space and cede ground to Black, Latin, Muslim, Marxist, all kinds of like hardcore revolutionaries. That is what is going to be necessary for the reconditioning of the only party that is actually capable of doing it. And that's the fundamental issue. It's the reason why I accepted Jill's invitation in the end, is that if it had come from any other political party or entity, I wouldn't have accepted it because there would not have been a path to victory through it. The reason is that the duopoly has so badly rigged the game against third parties that if you were trying to outright buy the electoral access that the Greens have fought for the last 40 years and been able to maintain, it would probably cost you 80 to 100 million to get the signatures and petitions and all of the things that would be necessary to just get on the ballot in 50 states. It's the reason why nobody has just up and started a third party, because it is prohibitively expensive and virtually impossible. For all of the issues inside the Green Party stayed on the field when everybody was getting knocked out of the game. And that was also part of the strategic efforts of the Greens. So I've said this 100 times, but they essentially laid a weapon down at the feet of a new generation with the understanding that it is going to be blacker and it is going to be browner and it is going to be more radical and more revolutionary in a bunch of ways. And they made they bet they're gonna have to lie in it, because now that I'm in the fight, I'm going to keep taking the fight to the people in exactly these terms. And we are going to build this into the genuine opposition party that is needed to bring down capitalism, bring down imperialism, bring down white supremacy, and end the attack on humanity and planet Earth. All of those things are of a piece. But with God as my witness, if Black folks are not centered and getting free through that process, I will have none of it. And I will fight anyone inside this party or outside this party that tries to decenter a Black liberation agenda in the way that we get free, because there is no liberation without Black liberation. And there is no liberation without land back, because the foundational sins on which this bloodbath was founded were indigenous genocide and African slavery. And without restorative justice for those two pieces, God himself will keep our revolution from being successful. So you have my solemn oath that Black folks will never be sidelined nor backseated in this affair. Y'all got me preaching today. Let's go. Come on.
Hello and good morning. I was just listening to everyone's conversation and take on the speech of the Ballot of the Village, and it was lovely, I would say, because the thing that I want to just point out was religion, as in Malcolm's first speech, in like half of it, like 20 minutes, he was talking about himself as identity, as he showed some gratitude, even though he was betrayed by his mentor Elijah Muhammad, but he still showed some grace. And in the middle and to the end, it was following with what Douglas says. But before I cut to that, I would like to mention that he would clarify that as Martin Luther King Jr. is a Christian pastor and all these other Christians, he is Muslim. And to go on to about that one of them was like, leave your religion behind the closet, just to find some common grounds with other people who are different. And in relating to what Douglas said, he's saying like they want you to sing rather than just show some reparation or some action to prove like representations.
Yep.
And he clarified that I am not speaking as a Democrat. I am not speaking as a Republican. I am a victim of a Democrat. I'm a
I'm not even
victim
speaking
of
as an
a
American. Yep. Go ahead.
yeah,
Yep.
and it was just all wrapped up to how common and relevant today is with all his ideas, because he said, I am not trying to speak nice. I am just telling you the truth as you can hear it. And that was the coolest thing, just to see how it comes to part just from everyone's take of just speaking about it. So yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Nah, thank you, man. And thank you for like bringing us back to Malcolm and the beauty of Malcolm's oratory, the beauty and the clarity of his communication. So if you go to the Butch Ware for Gov website, and somewhere at the bottom of the first page, you're going to see something that says solidarity beyond identity and ideology, right? And what that is, those are words that I chose reflecting on the very beginning of Malcolm's Ballot of the Bullet speech, literally. Because Malcolm is saying, I'm a Muslim. You might be a Christian, you might be an atheist, you might become from another tradition. If we make this about our identities, then nobody is getting anywhere. And I would never say leave your identity at home, put it in the closet. I think that that works fine for 1964. I would say show up as who you are and make room for others to show up as who they are. But in the end, this is not about an affirmation of our identities. This is about collective solidarity and collective liberation. And what Malcolm was saying there about if we let our confessional disputes divide us, then we are going to be divided and conquered. Somebody, please, please tell the Marxists. Like, somebody, please tell all of the so-called leftists who do not understand that their particular ideological, I'm a Marxist Leninist, I'm a, that all of their little variations and the little arguments that they have inside of their leftist ideologies are exactly the same kind of religious faith that Malcolm is talking about at the beginning of that speech. It's a belief system. It is rooted in particular kinds of scriptures and sacred texts. And people come to identify themselves with a particular ideological tendency. Some of those ideological tendencies are rooted in faith. Some of those ideological tendencies are rooted in secular traditions, but all of them ultimately become identity politics and banging on one another because you don't believe is exactly as how I believe. And the first thing that I'll tell people is that I do not expect the people that vote for us and that join this movement to agree on every single component of my political ideology, any more than I expect people to agree on my personal faith. I'm not expecting you to become Muslim when you join this movement. I'm not expecting you to become a Pan-Africanist revolutionary. I'm expecting you to listen and to learn, and I'm going to listen and learn too. And we are going to find solidarity and common ground to resist the structures of oppression that are diminishing us all. And that's what Malcolm was saying to the Black community in 64, is if we get caught up arguing about our respective identities, then we are going to be incapable of sharing space and building the solidarity that will be needed to get that man's knee off our neck. Having said that, neither can we ignore, right, the very real context of white supremacy, capitalism, imperialism, and the inequalities that it hardwires into our societies and into our personal interactions, into our social interactions. That is going to be the hard work of building this movement going forward. It's the heart work. Last thing that I want to say on this, and then I'm just looking at the time and realizing like y'all really did get me in preacher mode, and we're getting some good stuff, but I do want to get to a couple, kind of key pieces. One of the things that made Malcolm and Martin similar, despite their differences, it wasn't just that they both, sort of were kind of gradually becoming socialist, although never really identifying in those terms, right? They didn't make that a portion of their personal identification. The way that they were both becoming internationalists, third world, global solidarity, they were moving in similar ways politically. But for me, the fundamental piece that Malcolm and Martin brought that is absent from our contemporary politics is that once Malcolm was free from the nation, and once Martin started to understand the danger that liberalism, he would tend to refer to them as moderates, but he was talking about liberals, and every once in a while he also said liberals. But once they started to kind of get out of a certain portion of their ideological bubbles, they became incredibly, incredibly dangerous for a simple reason. Mark this, hear this part. Many of you won't hear it, but this is really probably the most important thing that I'm going to say today. Those of you that have been doing spiritual intensives with me since 2020, when they were just with the Muslims, you'll have heard me say this before. What they provided was not just tactics and strategies. It was not just a political analysis of the circumstances. Is that Malcolm, once he was free from the nation, still rooted 10 toes down in blackness, but he was no longer wedded to a racial ideology. That Malcolm and Martin both provided universal narratives of redemption that offered a path, a transcendent narrative that allowed for the spiritual redemption of both the oppressor and the oppressed. And the divisive, hate-filled politics of blue versus red make it impossible to articulate narratives that are transcended, rooted in moral truths beyond simple materialism. And this is also where the Marxists fall down, because Marxism has the best possible analysis of capital that could ever be done. But Marx's goal when he set out formulating that analysis was actually not an economic analysis. He was trying to be a philosopher, and his argument was essentially that the material circumstances make ideas, ideas don't make material circumstances. He was a materialist in purest terms, which means that when he's talking about material circumstances, it's gold. But when he tries to talk about metaphysics or transcendent meaning, there's nothing there. There is no transcendent moral narrative, no transcendent meaning that can be generated from this space. And it was because Malcolm was rooted in a faith tradition, and because King was rooted in a faith tradition. And for those of you that are rooted in ancestral indigenous traditions, that are rooted in spiritual traditions, that are rooted in meditative traditions, that are rooted in traditions that provide healing for that which becomes broken inside the human being, they were able to articulate narratives that allowed for our collective liberation, both of oppressor and oppressed. And it ain't because I have a white mama that I want white folks to get free too. I grew up in a community that was 97% Black in Washington, D.C. I would go weeks at a time without seeing another white person other than my mom. I didn't really know white people like that growing up. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with the fact that ultimately you are either aiming at human liberation or you're not aiming at human liberation. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said in a narration, he said, aid your brother whether he is oppressed or oppressor. And they said, Messenger of God, how do we aid an oppressor? And what they were asking is, why the hell would we help an oppressor? But they asked, how do we aid an oppressor? And he said, stop him from oppressing. Oppressors do not understand how beautiful the world will be when they no longer need. What did Toni Morrison say? She said, if you can only feel tall because somebody else is on their knees, then you have a serious problem. She was talking about white supremacy. They don't understand the dimensions of human possibility that are currently foreclosed, even for so-called white people, because we'll say so-called white people too, because there ain't no such thing as white people. That's not a real thing. Like that's a category that gets produced through white supremacy. Nobody has skin that's white, and Europeans come from all different kinds of backgrounds. And every European was at some point indigenous to some place too. Whiteness is this construct that robs you of your past, robs you of a future, and forces you to conform to this ultimately destructive modality of being in the world. I want freedom for everybody from that. And it's not just because I believe in universal mercy and compassion, but it's because I know that even if I only wanted freedom for my people, I couldn't get it unless white people think that there's a freedom in it for them too. We have this moment now where so many people are coming to perceive the simple reality, which is that white supremacy was an ideological concession given by ruling elites to make sure that their power went uncontested. Let the overseer have a whip and let him ride a horse. He still don't own no property. But now you won't have Bacon's Rebellion on your hand when indigenous people, enslaved Africans, and white indentured servants join in common cause against the ruling classes that are oppressing them all. That's the opportunity that we have. We have the opportunity for the 2025 Bacon's Rebellion, and it's not going to come from us trying to conceal our identities or sublimate them. It's going to come from wearing them in the open and creating a conversation that is about our collective liberation and our solidarity, not about our uniformity or unanimity. Unity does not require uniformity nor unanimity. I hope somebody's recording this because I never said none of this stuff before, and a lot of this stuff is good. So I'm going to come back and listen to this later. Okay. Other questions coming from Malcolm, or should I just go straight into the three things that I wanted to talk about today? Okay, three things that I wanted to talk about. I'm going to go to the theoretical piece. We're going to finish on the practical. The three theoretical things. The first is the ballot of the bullet. So remember, I gave you three registers at which Malcolm's framing the ballot of the bullet works. The first is that he wants you to embrace the notion that the ballot is a weapon of war, that it is every bit as potentially efficacious as military armaments. That's the first part. The second part is that it is an ultimatum. It is an ultimatum to white America, to the capitalist imperialist power structure, that freedom is inevitable. And if you foreclose our opportunities of accessing it through peaceful means, through the ballot, then you are guaranteeing that we will take it in the streets. And I don't know if y'all saw this post, but when folks came out against ICE and started throwing canisters, I had my son who has special needs that weekend. Otherwise, I'd have been down there getting myself arrested. But what I posted was, I said, I'm running for office to try to give people an option to vote our way to transformative change. But if people take revolution in the streets before that, I am fine with that. Not a problem for me. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. However we get free, as long as we get free. But the reason why we prefer taking electoral means when they're open is that the bloodshed is minimized when you take electoral means. And as a simple moral principle, if you can create fundamental change, end oppression, and make justice manifest without causing harm, then you have less risk of creating morally reprehensible behavior on your own part because you are desisting from harm. So always a nonviolent alternative is preferred. But as Kennedy said, the one who makes nonviolent revolution impossible makes violent revolution inevitable. It is inevitable. It is going to happen. And understand, I hate to put it in these terms, but if we are unsuccessful in this effort, then it is very likely that the society in which we are embedded will burn around us. And if that doesn't create a sense of moral urgency for you, I really don't know what will. The third level was, again, the ballot or the bullet, and that's understanding that if you don't have the responsibility to get yourself registered, we just may have to move you out of town. And that is a different position. It goes from being a potential option in the revolutionary toolkit to Malcolm making it, sorry, I'm thinking in Islamic terms now. Malcolm is making it a fard ain. He's making it an individual obligation that's incumbent upon every person in the community to take this step. Because if you are offered a weapon through which you could achieve peaceful liberation and you do not take it up, then you are engaged in a morally reprehensible act in that moment. You are refusing an armament that could be utilized to get you free, which is not a morally neutral act. So those three levels: first, the ballot or the bullet. I had detailed notes, even a few slides. Looking at the time, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to be able to speak in very simple terms. Fannie Lou Hamer, 1961, she has a Mississippi appendectomy. This is when Black women are being sterilized with hysterectomies without consent and without even their knowledge. Black women would routinely go in for checkups, gynecological appointments, and leave the hospital without their uteruses. And it's a Mississippi appendectomy in 61 that leads Fannie Lou Hamer to really become radicalized. She was always a firebrand, but she becomes radicalized in her politics and starts organizing in her community in Mississippi. That then leads her to create the Mississippi Freedom Democrats in 1964, the same year that Malcolm is delivering these speeches, the same year that Stokely Carmichael and SNCC are down registering folks in the South, in the Deep South. I'll put some links to Fannie Lou Hamer just to provide more context for this conversation, but she is, in practical terms, in many ways, the most effective voting rights organizer of the period. In terms of her practical organizational capacity, and there would be a lot that I would want to say about that. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to create that biographical sketch in order to move to this point. We're back on point one, the ballot or the bullet. The ballot is as effective an arm of combat as the bullet. I'm actually going to make the argument, and I know a lot of anarchists and so-called radicals are not going to believe this. But in this particular moment, the ballot is actually a much more efficacious arm of warfare than the bullet is. Infinitely more efficacious as a potential arm of war, for a series of relatively simple and straightforward reasons. But the first part is just a historical one. All of the things that the Green Party has been trying to fix, like getting rid of the Electoral College. Well, why do we have an Electoral College? We have an Electoral College because the southern slaveholding states, the northern states were also, by the way, slaveholding states until the American Revolution. And in the American Revolution, enough Black people joined the British side to fight against the colonists that the northern states, which had artisanal forms of slavery rather than plantation slavery, literally slowly got rid of enslavement in places like New York and Massachusetts because it was perceived as too dangerous to allow it to persist because of the presence of Black folks in those places. And they weren't dependent on plantation slavery so that they could much more easily transition. The southern states were dependent on plantation slavery, so they doubled down, but they didn't want to lose electoral fights. So they come up with the 3/5 compromise that gets coded in, where Black folks get counted for representational purposes as 3/5 of a person, but have no voting rights. Understand that right from the outset of this so-called republic, the racial logic of democracy was revealed as the structural weakness in the American imperial project. The American imperial project was being built on slavery. It was being built on capitalism. It was being built on westward expansion. It was being built on misogyny and patriarchy. Women didn't get to vote, none of that stuff. But it had evolved a rhetoric that was anti-monarchical. It had evolved a rhetoric that was Republican in its orientation, and it promised this idea of representative democracy as the cure for tyranny. And already the weakest point in the imperial project of America was framed: electoral politics. It's the reason why in '64 there is this flood to the South to get people registered to vote. Because in a society where you have representative democratic institutions, you actually have leverage against property. You have leverage against corporations. You have leverage against entrenched power. You can vote them out at any time. If voting didn't make any difference, they would not have killed off all them white boys in the Civil War trying to keep black folks from ever getting to vote. The Civil War was not fought just about freeing slaves. It was about control over democratic institutions. And that's why Malcolm said what he said in the Ballot of the Bullet a moment ago. He said, and they tell you that the South lost the war. South didn't lose that war. The South codified a bunch of mechanisms to disenfranchise vast segments of the population in order to protect capital, in order to protect empire, in order to protect white supremacy from the danger of representative democracy. Representative democracy is an inherent weakness and a structural breaking point inside of empire. And that's the reason why Malcolm was saying we're going to knock on every door in Harlem and we're going to register every black face behind every door, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, because those two are compromised. They're part of the structure of the system. But nonetheless, by leveraging electoral political power, you actually have the capacity to bring about immediate change, immediate change. And they know that. That's the reason why conservatives especially get so freaked out by demographic shifts in the United States of America, because they understand that as soon as white people are no longer a majority, the jig is up. It's the reason why ICE is targeting the state of California, because the largest ethnic minority in the state of California is white people. Latinos are 40% of the population in California. White folks are 34% of the population. And the raids and the theatrics of power designed to try to get people to self-deport in addition to being deported is an effort to ethnically cleanse the population, to restore electoral margins that are more manageable. By the way, this is also the reason for all of the ongoing Nakbas inside the state of so-called Israel. They always come down to the fact that they're engineering population control in order to preserve the fiction of democracy. Because as soon as populations of the oppressed outnumber those of the oppressor, then that's the end of the oppression. And what's going to happen if working class white folks achieve class consciousness and understand that they are part of the oppressed? We're really now, right? So this is a constant ideological struggle and a practical struggle to cover the weakest flank in the imperial apparatus. And if Malcolm and Kwame Ture, Kwame Ture said voting every 4 years is the height of bourgeois hypocrisy. He said it's the bare minimum. Politics is every day. But then he also said, but I shed my blood for the vote because I know the vote is how I organize my people. Even the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Jaded Revolutionaries understood the political potential in organizing for electoral purposes. But the most visionary ones, like Malcolm, understood that this is actually the structural weak point in. That's the reason why you heard in that segment that I had you guys listening to, Malcolm is telling you exactly how many senators there are, exactly how many committees. He's taking an exact measure of how the strategic forces of power. And then he points out, he said, did you know that there's a stipulation in the Constitution that any senator that's elected and the rights of the electorate have been violated in that person's state, they're automatically invalidated. So you have sitting senators that are not allowed, according to the rules that they themselves have established, to even be sitting there. Malcolm is perceiving and looking for the structural weaknesses in the system, because what he wants to do is he wants to take that black voting bloc that has been persuaded to vote Democrat, despite the fact that you put them first and that they put you last, and he wants to leverage that power in order to provide immediate transformation in the system. Immediate. Malcolm's not interested in long-term eventual changes. Malcolm wants the change now. I would argue that the circumstances making electoral politics the Achilles heel of American empire have they've increased exponentially since 64. So, simple example. In the 1980s, there were 50 media companies that controlled 90% of the media environment. Now, there are 5 companies that control 90% of the media environment. Social media is now where a lot of people get their information, a lot of their narratives, where a lot of the conditioning that we spoke about in the beginning of today's session, that takes place. Now, those have been purchased outright by 4 Zionists, right? Who are playing with algorithms and trying to make sure that they put the genie back in the bottle, the toothpaste back in the tube on this potentially, if not revolutionary, at least subversive form of communication that's been used for organizing. Well, why am I saying this? Because if Malcolm and Kwame Ture and the Panthers understood that the Democrats and the Republicans in 64 were just 2 wings of the same bird, what about 2025, when the Democrats have been chasing Republicans to the right for 30 years since Clinton, to the point where objectively, the Democrats now are so far to the right of where Ronald Reagan was in the 1980s that Reagan looks like, an FDR liberal in comparison to the neoliberal policies that the contemporary Democrats put forth. Reagan's version of trickle-down economics was child's play compared to the current Democrat version of neoliberal economics. So what does this mean? It means that today, elections are basically the only tool that we have left, aside from bullets. The corporate takeover of those 2 parties, complete. The corporate takeover of the media, complete. The corporate takeover of social media, complete, right? So where is the structural weakness? The structural weakness is that you can replace these authorities, especially in the ways that they have been strengthening executive authority as part of their imperial project over these last 20 years, is that targeted interventions to get executive authority allows you to make fundamental change rapidly. We're watching Trump do it. In the state of California, the governor has massive appointment powers. We win this, and we essentially determine what the deep state is in the state of California by ourselves. Executive authorities also have broad capacities to declare public emergencies. We can declare a public health emergency on day 1 and get single payer healthcare without even waiting for the vote. And we already know that in 2022, they had the votes. It's just that Gavin Newsom got 2.7 million from the insurance companies, and then they didn't bring the vote to the floor so that they could, shield themselves from the repercussions of having to vote down what they knew was massively popular in the state. This is a structural weakness, and it's very nearly the last one that remains. It's the reason why Trump is so desperate to dismantle it. And it's the reason why the solutions that the Democrats offer to Trump's takeover are not a resistance at all, but their efforts to create the same kind of structures of authority for themselves. It's the reason why I came out against Prop 50 in the state of California, this idea that you're going to somehow solve gerrymandering by gerrymandering back, right? All of that are efforts for both of these parties, who are just factions inside a single party, to make sure that their power does not get contested by people that are outside of the structures of capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy. It's because they understand better than any of us do how vulnerable they are. Back to Malcolm, never let your enemy tell you how many of you there are. Never let the man that you are against form your opinions for you. See, I only have one advantage. I've only ever had one advantage in my life, is that I've never believed a single thing that this power structure told me. Not once. Never believed any of it. Always assumed that I was being lied to at every step of the way. Y'all might not know this, but my school on the south side of Minneapolis was the only school in the state of Minnesota that had a Russian program. And I had grown up in the Cold War era being told that the Russians were the bad guys and that they were going to nuke us and that communism was this, that. I took Russian in high school just because I figured if this is what they're saying about Russia, then obviously Russia's probably down AF. So I need to find out everything that I can about Russia. And why am I going to listen to the man telling me about Russia when I should just learn Russian so I can understand what the Russians have to say? And then I can make up my own mind. But all of that is just to say that they are not spending hundreds of millions of dollars, even billions of dollars, to try to propagandize you into thinking that you have to continue to rubber stamp the status quo. They're not doing that like for fun. They're doing that because they have to. They're doing that because at any moment, a single election can end them, and they know it. That's the reason why in the Reconstruction era, when there was this window when Black folks had full voting rights, they had to immediately do everything that they could to take those away. Because in the 1870s, it became very, very clear that if you let oppressed people participate directly in representative democratic institutions, they're going to overthrow their oppressors. They're going to vote them out. Last part about why it's more effective. Thanks, Jason, for that one. I didn't know the Richard Pryor line. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat. The last piece about the ballot or the bullet. Why is it a more efficacious arm of war? Well, just as the corporate power structures have foreclosed on the other angles of attack to the system, except for the elections, which they have to preserve, right? Because it's part of the ideology of American supremacy. Similarly, they have been heavily militarizing, and this is what Democrats and Republicans have both been doing. The cop cities in quote unquote blue cities and blue states, they've been heavily militarizing because their anticipated response for the uprising that they know is coming is massive police repression. It's the reason why they sent 200 troops in riot gear to my campus at UCSB, like 200 yards that way, to remove 30 kids, many of them my students, from the UCSB encampment. Was because those forms of organized, not mobilization. See, an encampment is not episodic. An encampment is ongoing. It's organized. You have to provide for food. You have to have rotations. People were doing classes. There was community education. New forms of solidarity were emerging. New forms of sociability were emerging. Precisely because it wasn't a one-off episodic event, it was something that was being reproduced on a day-to-day basis. The same way that Occupy Wall Street was dangerous and had to be pulled out because it's not a mobilization, it's systematic organization. The Biden administration had to do that because those encampments would have been the end of the Biden administration. It would have ended with Biden leaving office in disgrace, the same way that the Bangladeshi president left office in disgrace when the students wouldn't go back to their dorms. That's what was coming. And it was literally weeks away at that point in time. That's why they were so desperate to contain it, because they know how fragile it is. So they have to prepare to amp up and escalate the repression. That's the reason for the acceleration of the police state, despite the fact those of us that actually lived through the crack era, like I grew up in Washington, D.C. when it was the murder capital of the world. Like I remember actual crime. Y'all cannot fool me into thinking that we have a crime problem in the U.S. in 2025 when we have had steadily declining violent crime rates and property crime rates for the last 30 years. It's all propaganda. It's all game. It's all hustle designed to ideologically justify the creation and escalation of a police state structure that has nothing to do with crime prevention, because police don't prevent crimes, number one. I mean, like, that's just not a thing. They also don't solve crimes. so they're there for one reason. They are there to put you back in your place when the inevitable resistance comes. So why am I then making this rhetorical argument? Because Outkast said it best. Niggas ranting and raving about gats. Nigga, they made them gats. They got some shit that'll blow out our backs from where they stay at. If you think that you are just squaring up in the streets with arms against their drone strikes and against their surveillance modalities, if you think that you're going to do this the old-fashioned way, hey, more power to you. But the structures of those, listen, the United States government is the most dangerous instrument of surveillance and death dealing ever to have existed in human history. And everything, every single thing that they did to Palestinians, they will not hesitate to do to you. Chris Hedges said it. He said, if you do not stand up for Palestinians in this moment, sooner or later, you're all Palestinians. It's the reason why we can't give up. We can't forget about them. We can't pretend like a ceasefire is a real thing. We can't let, their rhetorical control over the circumstances cause us to desist in our fight. We cannot untether the two halves of the imperial boomerang. We have to understand that our fight for our basic freedoms here are the best way of guaranteeing not just an end to genocide, but Palestinian liberation, an end to apartheid, a free Palestine from the river to the sea. That is going to come if we are able to successfully contest for power here inside the imperial core. The resistance has been doing their job. We need to do ours. I'm going to come back to that in a moment when we talk about how we bring together these pieces of resistance. But I'll just finish that point. I'm a historian, not a soothsayer. I can't see into the future, but I can read the past. I do not expect that I think that there is a kind of romanticization of violent revolution that sits in certain leftist circles amongst people who have never in their lives experienced what it's like to inhabit a truly violent and chaotic environment. I am not one of them people. I know. I once, this is a true story. I don't know if I've ever told this story. I probably can't tell the whole of it today. I literally once had so I used to pick out the fro, rather than letting the curls sit. And I used to keep a fist pick in the back of my hair. I actually had a pick shot out of the back of my head in 1993 or 94. 1 inch the other direction, and that's the end of your future professor right there, on that spot. Like, so people that like have not like actually inhabited in environments where bullets are flying on a regular basis just have this wild, like romantic conception. And it's the reason why real revolutionaries, like I made a clip of Fred Hampton, basically dismantling SDS and the Weathermen for adventurism. He said they're running people into harm's way for no reason. We need to be disciplined. It's not that we're afraid of a confrontation. If a confrontation comes, we will be ready for it. That's why I said you need to be prepared for armed self-defense at all stages. But it is not a thing that you are going to seek out if you have other means still at your disposal. Those other means are still at our disposal. They're the preferred means, and structurally speaking, under our contemporary circumstances, they're likely the most efficacious means. Either way, we have to be prepared for both contingencies. We have to be prepared for the ballot. We have to be prepared for the bullet. And that's also the reason why mutual aid and direct action have to be traveling with our electoral politics intervention, because we have to know how to take care of communities' needs and to keep communities safe. Whether we are successful in our electoral political efforts or whether we are ultimately unsuccessful, that is the best way to provide safety, security, abundance, prosperity for communities in a circumstance where empire is collapsing. Do y'all understand me? Okay. You can summarize it in this way. If you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. And so we need to be making those preparations because they are the most effective form of resistance for either contingency, for either the ballot or the bullet. And the last thing that I'll say on this, and I've said this in a few gatherings, but I don't think in this one, it was rereading the great third world Marxist, Walter Rodney. He has this history of the Russian Revolution, which was published posthumously after he had passed away. It was based on his lecture notes on that topic. And he pointed out that in May of 1917, the May Revolution in Russia, there were 8,000 Bolsheviks across the entire country of Russia, only 8,000. Like, for context, is like, y'all think the Green Party is weak, and it is. Objectively, we have not built the infrastructures. The only place that that's not true right now is in California, because we're building from San Diego to Humboldt. We're like going into communities, working with organizers, gathering people together, bringing communities together. But like, that infrastructure has never been built before. But if you think that we're not enough people, the Bolsheviks were 8,000 people in all of Russia in 1917 in May. 8,000. Even as Tsarism is collapsing, and finally the Tsar flees and goes, I forget which European country he goes to, to go live, to go live high on the hog while he runs as his country collapses. The Bolsheviks number in October of 1917 still only 240,000 people. Now, there's two things that I took from that. One, massive organizational effort from the cracks in the imperial facade to the ultimate breaking of it. They're doing the work. They're growing the units. They're building that infrastructure. But it's still a tiny fraction of the overall Russian population. When Tsarism collapses, the system falls apart. It's not that they're the most numerous, it's that they're the people that have been doing the work. They're not a majority, but they're everywhere, and they have been building the infrastructure that's necessary. So the Bolsheviks become the alternative organizational framework to put together a society that is essentially crumbling under the contradictions of capitalism and imperialism. Do you understand that we are running to win? Because we want to bring about this change. But even if we run and they cancel elections, we still win. Because when things fall apart, if we are building in the same way that Kwame Ture said, In the same way that Imam Jamil El-Amin said, that if we understand that organization for the vote is, that the vote is how we organize our people, then we are putting together the infrastructure that will be needed, whether we are able to achieve those electoral successes or ultimately if we end up in a bullet scenario rather than a ballot scenario. If you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. And if you are preparing for multiple contingencies through the same process, then there is no wasted motion in the plan. Am I making sense? Or is this like, okay, because like some people play to win the game and don't worry about tomorrow, but smart people play to win today and keep keep an arm in the bullpen ready to go tomorrow. So plans within plans. All right, so that's the ballot of the bullet. It leads easily to the second point. The second point is about understanding. Let me just have a sip of my coffee. We're going to knock on every door. We're going to knock on every door. We're going to knock on every door. This is the place where the Green Party has been weakest in response to Doug's question. And thanks, Doug. Doug probably just took his shots and then got off the call. I don't even see him on here no more. And that would be very typical of Doug. Great dude. I love him. Not above a cheap shot from time to time. I'm just kidding. I'm saying that just so that when he watches this later, he feels targeted. We have to knock on every door. This cannot be just a media campaign. It can't just be a social media campaign. This actually has to be a door knocking, a phone banking, a face-to-face interaction campaign. We have to get out and reawaken people's consciousness and imagination to the possibility that they might actually be represented through one of these elections, to get them to embrace their power. And Malcolm said, we're going to get you registered not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but independent. I'm running Green because we need those structures and because the Green Party has the best platform, the best access. It's the only third party that's positioned. When it comes to the rhetoric of our presentation, it's very, very important for people to understand that we are independent of this system, because the reason why people think that the ballot is useless is because if you're voting for a Democrat or a Republican, it is. That's it. Like, it's a super uncomplicated thing that they are completely accurate when they feel absolute apathy for voting for either Democrats or Republicans. And so we need to appeal to that. And that's also part of where it's not about your ideology, it's not about your identity, it's about empowering people to take representative democracy back for themselves. Whoever, don't care who you pray with, don't care who you lay with. This isn't about that. It's not about your identity. It's not about where you're situated in a culture war. It's about seizing back control over this thing that is the fundamental challenge to all of the repressive mechanisms of empire, which everybody now across the ideological spectrum is becoming acutely aware of that. So the messaging needs to be empowering to people as you go out and you knock these doors and as you do this phone banking. But literally, I don't care what state you are in. If you're not in California, you could still be phone banking. I don't care where you are. Like, everybody needs to start to bring people into this, because we're going to need a kind of infrastructure that has not previously existed. The ballot or the bullet, there's this structural weakness, and there's this moment where both of these parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are more unpopular than they've ever been. Republicans, Trump is more unpopular with the Republican base than a Republican has been in a long time. The Democrats have historically low approval ratings. I mean, like, they're just, catastrophically bad. Literally, if we do anything, it's going to look great. in comparison. So it means that we actually have to build this Okay, Doug just came into the chat. He's still here. It's true. If he takes a shot, that is fair. If he takes a shot, he always waits for the response. And you know I love you, Doug, like a brother. Last piece, and then I want to open up for some questions, and then we'll have a final closing kind of call to action. The last part is about that compulsory nature of the ballot. Sarah mentioned it yesterday, like it's an intimidating thing to have to think about going out and making this appeal to your neighbors when you think that you're surrounded by Trump voters, or you think that you're surrounded by Blue MAGA, or you think that you're surrounded by whomever. The reality is that right down to the present, Pew Research data shows that 40% of American voters, despite the fact that they're being constantly conditioned and propagandized by mainstream media that tells them that they live in a country comprised of blue states and red states, or they live in a state that's comprised of blue counties and red counties, 40% of American voters identify as independents right down to the present. The largest group. The second largest group identifies as Democrats. It's still only 30%. Third largest group, Republicans, identify as at 25% in those polls. But just understand that you have been taught to think that your neighbors are racist Trump supporters. You've been taught to think that your neighbors are, MSNBC addicted blue MAGA libs. I know a few of those, but that's actually not the overwhelming majority of who our neighbors actually are. Most of our neighbors are directly susceptible to common sense appeals about the things that concern them and address the things that address their concerns most directly. So this was another piece that came to me out of rereading Rodney on the Russian Revolution, is I was reminded of a very, very simple fact that many like kind of doctrinaire Marxists tend to forget about. Because if you listen to the Panthers, they're talking about our people need political education. And Malcolm said our people need political education. And political education is super, super important. But the thing is that political education is really for the cadres. It's for the people that do the work of spreading the message. When it comes to actually spreading the message, socialists or anti-capitalists of any kind, because there are anti-capitalist resistance movements before Marx is born, and so they're not socialists in those terms, but anti-capitalists of all kinds are successful not because they convert people to their ideological position. We're not going to persuade everyone to think like the way the people in this gathering think, and not even all of the people in this gathering are going to think exactly the same. Many of you guys are going to accept 94% of what I say and argue with 6%, and that's fine. But the point is this, is that we are not going to persuade our way to a revolution, because that's actually never happened. What happens is that anti-capitalists provide the best material solutions to people's basic needs in circumstances where capitalism and empire are crumbling and falling apart. Don't go out there and try to persuade people, hey, there's this, there's this Black history professor that talks real good, and and he says these cool things like, from Malcolm and other people, and it gets me excited about politics. That's cool. Show them clips and everything. Show them even some of the workout videos. You never know what's going to get people, interested in following the campaign. But what is going to get people on our side is universal healthcare. What's going to get people on our side is common sense fix to the housing problem. What's going to get people on our side is fixing homelessness. What's going to get people on our side is state divestment from not just Zionism, but state divestment from all mass murder, from all of the war machine, right? We should not have our, 401ks, when we're working for a state institution in the state of California, being poured into supporting defense industries. Like that's not, that shouldn't happen. We should not, against our wills, have our retirement tethered to incinerating people in other countries. And these are things that wherever people might be situated on the ideological spectrum, they hear them. And I could explain to you all of the ways that people that I thought were like dyed in the wool Trump supporters and would never consider voting for us became Green Party supporters. But you cannot go in with this expectation that the world is divided in the way that Massa says that the world is divided, because that narrative is designed to disempower you from making the appeal that they know that they are most vulnerable to. They know that they're vulnerable to a direct populist appeal that is about meeting people's needs and that is not framed in ideological terms or in identity terms. It's just because those things are crucial. They're parts of who we are. But the thing that we're fighting for is a thing that everybody actually is fighting for. Most of them just ain't aware of it. So focus in the messaging on meeting those needs. That's actually how this work gets done every single time across the board. Right. Yeah. And we'll have to have a separate sorry, I was just reading the chat. We'll have to have a separate conversation as to why we think Marjorie Taylor Greene actually stepped down and is resigning from Congress. Any number of conspiracy theories that we could go with on that. I want to stop here because I've sketched out in as much detail as I think is necessary the nature of the argument. Around why electoral politics in this moment historically and how some of the basic pieces of how to do it. I want to take questions on that part, and then and I'm going to try to keep these to about 20 minutes, because then I want our closing argument that is about the practical mechanics of how we do it from here and what that means for every single person that's present in the gathering, because there is actually a very, very clear and comprehensive roadmap to victory now inside the campaign. It's not a hard thing to do. We have the way mapped out, but there's a lot of help that we need along the way. So I want to let you know what the map looks like and then ask for your help to actually do it. So questions first. Karen, are you, is that a hand? Or maybe she's talking to somebody else. See, this is the reason why I don't like getting into animated preacher mode, because then everybody just sits back and just like enjoys the show instead of like engaging with the content. Yeah, come on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the show. But but yeah, I'm really curious about joining forces. It was mentioned in the chat, and I think about it a lot about how there's a lot of people trying to make this move all over the country, and I want to know who you're interested in. I want to see how, I want to know how like we can best combine and start feeding off of each other. I've also been trying to support Shama's campaign up in Washington. And so,
Yep.
I want to hear about our allies and gathering kind of a group of people that we all believe in and see it really become a movement, because a lot of it feels very focused on a person.
Yep.
They're very individual groups. So that's my question. Love to hear what you think about it.
Excellent. So the first thing that I'll say is Shama Sawant. I'm a huge fan of Shama. We've been in conversation about coordinating campaign activities. She's the person on the so-called left, like participating in national political conversations, that I have the most trust in and respect for. I know 100% that she absolutely stands for all of the things that she stands for, and that she is willing to fight with her very last breath for every last one of them. So people that are, that's how I'm wired. So people that are wired like that, and we, Jason, who is Jill's campaign manager, is also my campaign manager, has worked with Shama in Washington State for a long time. So we have regular communication between the two campaigns. I'm a huge fan. with respect to other potential strategic coalitions, I'm going to be blunt about this. We have had really, really great success recruiting volunteers and donors from, for example, DSA chapters all around the state and all around the country. I actually, and I mean, this is going to be on tape, I don't think that there's a snowball's chance in hell that there will ever be a DSA Green coalition effort at any level, because I think that the Democrat Party explicitly forbids that and will not ever allow for any kind of coalition building on that along those lines. So for me, it's really about making an appeal to the rank and file rather than it is about seeking to have some kind of coalition. I'll also just be blunt in this gathering and say that PSL's decision to run a candidate against me in the state of California 4 months after we had launched our campaign, and after getting a direct verbal confirmation, Peace and Freedom Party told me personally that they would never support a candidate against me for governor and that they would instead run a lieutenant governor candidate. They said this in April. And then in June, they announced that they were supporting a PSL candidate to run against me. So you can't make coalitions with people that don't make coalition with you. There is no kind of leftist coalition that's possible when people are going to directly renege on promises that they make with their mouth to your face. You just have to understand at that point in time, you are dealing either with unethical people or actual ops. And from my standpoint, there's no difference between those two things, right? So as far as I'm concerned, PSL and Peace and Freedom are both dead to me, dead. And that's not a concern from an electoral standpoint, because Peace and Freedom has never gotten more than 50,000 votes in a state election in California. They've never had any kind of electoral impact anywhere near the electoral impact of even mid-tier Greens. But what it is that it's an opportunity that's missed for, especially, we had whole chapters of Peace and Freedom that had volunteered to work for the campaign and then were given explicit commands not to work for the campaign. We had people that were PSL rank and file folks that were then forbidden from working with our campaign after we offered them everything. Left unity slate, we were in conversation with them about a left unity slate since February. So Raven's asking why. I can tell you why, man. I mean, sorry, my dad's voice is playing in my head right now, so this is going to be very impolitic, but it's too many chiefs, not enough Indians. A lot of people, it's not enough for them that we achieve liberation. They have to be the ones driving. And the thing that you guys need to understand about me is that as soon as someone joins this party that's better positioned than I am to run for governor of California, I mean, not in this electoral cycle, we can't change it, but let's say, 2032, we're talking about a presidential election. If Nina Turner, who is like very, very green curious and a good friend of mine and calls me all the time, like if Nina Turner finally makes the jump and decides that she wants to run, and that's the better decision from a strategic standpoint. I have no ego investment in this project whatsoever. My only goal is liberation. Only goal is liberation. And if I'm the best person to deliver it, all the better. But I personally find it much less tiring to be behind the scenes. So in the end, it's unfortunate. And so my experience with both DSA and with Peace and Freedom and PSL is just to understand that in the end, we're going to have to set the pace. And if there are people that are like willing to be allies and collaborators like Shama, then join forces. But you can't join forces with people that don't want to join forces with you. That's just not, it's not a thing. Doug. Go ahead, Doug, if you're still there.
Oh, hey, salam alaikum, brother. You know I
Appreciate
would never leave you. No, I would never abandon my brother.
you, brother.
Yeah. So, my question is, what can people who don't live in California do to help you? Because I'm in Illinois, I mean, there are, like you said, there's Green Party curious in the midst of a blue ocean.
Yep.
But like as a matter of fact, we have elections coming up now in March, and there's a number of people who are running who really should be green.
Yep.
So, but talking about you, my brother, what can I do here in Illinois to help you?
Really,
And one quick question, then I'll land my plane. Will you be speaking at Mass ICNA?
I was invited last year. I'll consider coming back to Mass IGNA. It's a Muslim, event that does get a lot of eyes on it. So I'll answer the first question first. You can donate, you can volunteer, phone bank. We have a bunch of different tasks that really, you can work on them remotely. The folks that are in state, our focus, in the past month has been turning from kind of like raising voter awareness and public events to field operations and building out the infrastructure for door knocking and phone banking. But phone banking can be done remote, door knocking can't, right? So we actually need soldiers from all around the country. And I've done fundraisers in Minnesota. I've done fundraiser in Texas. We're going to work on one for New York, because that was one of the places where in the Steinwehr campaign we were able to do very well. I made the case in interview with Brianna Joy Gray on Bad Faith podcast that was probably maybe like March or April, shortly after I launched the campaign. And because I never write things down, I would really love to go back and watch that video, because I made a very, very clear argument about all the ways in which, if you are interested in breaking the duopoly control nationwide, then intervening in California in this cycle is the most direct action that you can take. But the short version of it is that if we turn the governor's mansion green in California, the Democrats are dead and they will never recover.
Hey, thanks, brother.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Okay, good. Then this takes us into the closing stretch. I've laid this out before in some gatherings, but not in all. So I'm gonna just talk about a few
because libraries are not
practical realities of this cycle, and then how we can move in order to be successful. Yeah, Wendy's pointing out we do have many rank and file PSL volunteers. I can't follow the chat, and the drama. Like, listen, don't get distracted by the PSL drama. Honestly, like it's really like it's so like it's classic leftist infighting. Do not worry about it. Our eyes are set way higher than that. We have a plan, and the goal is to execute the game plan. Everything that facilitates completion of the mission, we undertake and we focus on. And everything that inhibits the success of the mission, we leave aside, right? So that's it. It doesn't concern the success of the mission. We focus on the success of the mission. So here's how the success of the mission is structured. It's based on a few simple predicates on how we use that electoral power, that weakness in the structural armor in the state of California, in order to deal the death blow to the system. There's one outcome, one electoral outcome, that if we are able to achieve it, that all of the other dominoes fall more or less automatically if you can get one domino to fall. The one domino that we need to have fall is that we need to finish in the top two in the primary. The mail-in voting begins like the end of the first week or the second week in May, and the voting ends on election day, June 2nd, 2026. There's basically a 3-week, 1-month window in order to produce a single outcome that, if we are able to produce it, will fundamentally change the nature of human history from that point on, because it will basically break the control that the duopoly has had over American electoral politics in a way that they can't put it back together once that part of it falls. And I'll explain that part after I talk about June 2nd. So we talked a little bit about this yesterday. I'll just be like explicit. Um, it's a top two primary, and it's a jungle primary. It's not like Zoran's primary in New York where you have to go through one or another of the party mechanisms. It's open. And that was designed in all of the places that have jungle primaries. It has actually been heavily tilted against independent third-party candidates because the demography of the state will usually just give you one blue versus one red. And that's the reason why they agree on that as a basic set of rules time and time again. We can fix that, in the next electoral cycle. No more jungle primaries after this one, once we win this one. But that jungle primary, which is designed to protect the uniparty, actually makes the uniparty uniquely vulnerable inside the state of California. The reason for that is that there are as many or slightly more registered independents in the state of California than there are registered Republicans. It leaves them demographically open more to an attack from the left than it does to an attack from the right. And when that happens, it produces a bunch of secondary effects in the rhetoric. So the first part is just to mention what's the target? How do you get to second place? And then what happens when we get to second place? Second place, as I mentioned before, ever since they switched to the jungle primary, the lowest vote percentage to get second was about 15.5%. The highest was 23%, something like that. It was 17% last time. If we take the idea that we have to get the highest possible percentage, a quarter of the vote is going to be enough. The total voter turnout in the 2022 primary was only 5.5 million people. And that's because part of the effort to rubber stamp the status quo is to bury this primary at a time when people are not usually used to voting at all, right? So there's not a lot of, direct political engagement. However, that also produces a structural vulnerability insofar as if you are able to mobilize otherwise disaffected voters that don't usually engage the system, that just through driving voter turnout, you are going to be positioned very, very well. It's literally going to be a matter of maybe 1.5 million votes. That's all it's going to take. And 1.5 million votes spread through a state like California with a population of 40 million people. Just for a simple reference, they're not all registered voters, but there's 1 million Muslims in the state of California. The number of registered voters usually comes in about between 500 and 600,000. That's a demographic that already 53% of American Muslims voted for the Steinway ticket in 2024. And that was when they were running in an environment where the rhetoric was, if you don't vote blue, you're going to get Trump. That won't be part of the conversation in the primary. So, and there won't be another Muslim on the ballot. So that's a demographic. We may be able to get 70% of the Muslim vote in a primary election like this. And if we're able to just successfully work the same networks that we did in the Steinway campaign, that already we've set aside a significant chunk of the votes that we need. Targeted interventions of the same kind in the African American community as the only campaign that is running on reparations, as the only campaign that is running on shutting down Pelican Bay, on the only campaign that is actually run by an abolitionist, targeted interventions with the indigenous community as the only land back campaign. And yes, that also includes PSL, for the record, because notoriously authoritarian socialists don't like giving land back. They like keeping whatever colonialism has seized and bringing it into the so-called socialist fold. So all of that is to say, with targeted interventions to the Mexican American community as the only abolish ICE platform, then we have a very, very clear shot at getting those 1.5 million votes. What happens when that happens? That day is the end of politics as you guys have known it. And the reason is that it's going to create a one-on-one matchup between me and whichever Democrat has survived that process. And as Chelsea pointed out, is that when those face-to-face interactions have taken place in debate environments, it's deadly for them. Just to provide context of something that Chelsea mentioned yesterday, the SEIU Local 1000 was the first large, candidate debate. Katie Porter, Javier Becerra, all of the top Dem candidates were there. I was the only non-Democratic candidate. When they closed the door and held the vote of the 1,000 members that were in the room, I won the best candidate hands down. One report from inside the room said that when you put the next 3 candidates together, I still beat them. This is not an interaction that they can survive. They don't have anything that can stand up on a debate stage to me channeling Malcolm and bringing that into American political discourse in 2025. They don't have anything that can do that. Swalwell can't do that. Katie Porter can't do that. And good news, Jason just put this also into the chat. Because of that, the other major multi-candidate forum, which was the APAPA forum in Sacramento, and this was the one where you've seen those clips of Katie Porter like losing it with the reporter, and yeah, so those came from an interview that all of the candidates that participated in this candidate forum did with Julie Watts, a CBS Sacramento reporter. We've already heard from CBS Sacramento and from Julie Watts, and off the record, like Julie Watts is a big fan. Like she did a 2-hour interview with me, and all of the other interviews were an hour long. And she said, I just kept asking you follow-up questions because your answers weren't like the other answers. So she's been, I'm pretty sure, working behind the scenes to make sure that we're included in these conversations. And the good news is that the one televised debate that is going to take place right before voting opens, this is at the end of April, we've already been invited to participate in that. They're dead. Like they're dead. But that will be a one-off media dismantling, right? If we do not use the time between now and then to build the infrastructure inside community. That will be a media performance. But that media performance, as great as it is, like Zoran humiliating Andrew Cuomo was fantastic. But Zoran didn't win because he humiliated Andrew Cuomo in that debate. He won because he humiliated Andrew Cuomo in that debate after knocking on every door in every borough, right? That laying the groundwork is the requisite for having the air attack actually hit. Sorry for the war metaphor, but it literally works. I mean, one is broadcast over the airwaves and the other is executed along the ground. So those two pieces need to be working in tandem. And the other reason why they're going to be so when that happens, if we're able to get to that top 2 point, it's going to be one blue versus one green. How are they going to then make the argument you're going to let the state go over to the Republicans? The one argument that the Democrats keep falling back on over and over and over again is the lesser of two evils argument. That argument is off the table from that point on. And all of those Republican voters, and by the way, we had polls showing consistently, the last 2 polls that came out before the 2024 presidential election indicated that more people were leaving Team Red to vote green than were leaving Team Blue to vote green. Well, what's going to happen when all of those those independent, free-thinking Republican voters see me just demolishing the Democrat establishment in every single debate? I can tell you what happened in Prop 50, the debate around Prop 50. A Republican think tank took my answer to the question of Prop 50 that I gave to Julie Watts when we sat down for those interviews. It had been posted online, and they ran a YouTube ad. Do you know these people ran a multi-million-dollar ad for us? I had my students coming into class saying, Dr. Ware, you popped up during my YouTube video yesterday about Prop 50. And I'm like, and they're like, how much did that thing cost? I was like, it didn't cost me a dime. It's going to create a confrontation that the Dems cannot survive. remember that Matt Gonzalez got 47% of the vote against Gavin Newsom in 2003, being outspent 20-1. We will not have a fundraising problem if we survive that primary, because the money to match up against the Democrats will be pouring in at that point in time. We will be well resourced. We will have appeal across a lot of ideological and identity spectrums, and we're going to have a massive advantage. We're going to have you guys having built an infrastructure. And I mean, listen, I try to keep my ego out of these things, but you can make an objective assessment of the situation. We are going to beat the brakes off of them in candidate quality. They're just not going to be able to communicate effectively to the issues and communicate with people from the heart in an authentic way, the way that we are. Even if you, and tell this to your liberal friends, even if you don't think that we'll win, which one would you rather have? Would you rather have me versus them, pulling them towards sanity? Or would you rather have them chasing another Republican to the right? It sets up from a rhetorical and a messaging standpoint that puts us in a very, very strong position. If we are able to get to that second place, we are going to have national media coverage on every single thing that I do between June and November. And the biggest advantage that always is working for the duopoly and against the Greens is the total media blackout. They will not be able to stage a total media blackout when a Green candidate is involved in a one-on-one race for the governor's mansion in the state of California. It is going to be the biggest news that has happened in politics. It's going to make Zoran's run inside New York City look like child's play in terms of the gravity and the media environment that it's going to create. If you liked me on the Breakfast Club, wait till you see me on Colbert. Do you understand what happens when these conversations come outside of this space and enter mainstream political discourse? They'll never get up from it. We have it with one domino. It's just that that domino is going to take a lot of heavy lifting on the part of everybody that's like in the movement, the 800 plus volunteers that have already signed up, everybody that's in the room that comes to these pieces. Like we all need to be doing literally everything that we can to raise three things: voter registrations, donations, and volunteers. We already landed the biggest debate, but all of the media opportunities that are going to come in between now and then, many of them are going to be predicated on us having to make a case for inclusion. And to make a case for inclusion, showing rising voter registration amongst Greens is evidence that we can present that this candidacy has to be included, that they can't freeze us out of the conversations, right? Rising donations, in addition to the fact that we actually spend them on field teams instead of the same consultants over and over again, which is what the Democrats do. Those things are also metrics that if we show progress in those domains, then they're not going to be able to keep us out of all of those intermediary conversations. The sooner that we break through into the mainstream media conversation, political conversation, the more damage we're going to do. We don't want to wait till April. So that means literally building that infrastructure now, and it means starting the phone banking, it means starting the door knocking. All of that requires resources. People need to hear things 3 to 5 times. Get ready to lovingly be that bug. I'm going to give you this now. And just, Chelsea, put the fundraising piece in the chat. We need, in every single one of the 8 regions, we've broken the state down into 8 geographic regions that have the same rough number of voters. We need a field office in each of those places. Those things ain't free. We need to be able to pay for field operations coordinators on the ground in each of those spaces, because we want to make sure, just like Malcolm said, that we are not leaving any door not knocked on. You guys would be astonished if you had been with me in Humboldt County. Humboldt County was more open to this message than any of the places that I've been so far, largely because they get ignored by the political establishment across the board. If we just show up, it's going to allow significant numbers of votes for us. If we show up in on the Native American reservations throughout the state, if we show up like I did with the street organization leaders of Pyrus, Brims, and Crips in the city of San Diego, then we're going to be able to recruit voters into the system that have never been participants in it. So all of that is going to take resources. Yeah, freedom ain't free. Somebody just put it into the chat. I'm going to take one last round of questions for strategy before we close this piece out. But before I take a single question from y'all, I need y'all to fill up the chat box with donation pledge now. Like, we need resources to do it. And I know many of y'all paid just to come in today, but I know Doug didn't make a donation because I've seen his name on the donation list, because I would have had something to say about Doug if he had already made a donation. So Doug is still here. Doug can go ahead and get right on that donation list, since he's like holding my feet to the fire every chance that he gets in the most productive of ways. Like, you guys don't, I hope you understand that I really, really love Doug, and I'm just having fun with him because I know I can, because we go back, damn, 20 years? Where does the time go, Brother Doug? So we need money for billboards. Oh, the merch store just dropped. Get in, get your t-shirts, get your pieces. Last questions from you guys. We'll take one short round before I go ahead and give my closing for the session today. We're almost to 2 hours. So who's ordering t-shirts? All right, you know what? I'll give y'all a minute to go ahead and order your t-shirts. Hold on. I get an update on my phone when y'all actually order a t-shirt. Let me take a look. If this is all talk. Okay, there are some new orders coming in. All right, so final ask. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Walaikum
Thank you so
salam.
much.
I'm doing well,
Thank
and thank you.
Thank you for everything you're sharing. I'm a local organizer with Chino Valley for Palestinian Liberation, and I am also a professor of ethnic studies and sociology. And I'm really love a lot of what I'm hearing from you. When you are counting on the Muslim vote, I've been doing a lot of organizing. I'm non-Muslim, but within the last 2 years, that's been my primary folks that I've organized with around Palestine. And with this value of collective liberation, which I firmly believe is what we need to be looking at, and aiming all of our focus on helping understand how all of our struggles are interconnected against systems of domination like capitalism, imperialism, and such. Yep. We have run into issues with the Muslim vote because they're very around the queer LGBTQ organizing spaces. All of a sudden, collective liberation seems to not be for everyone. So would like you to speak on this.
And don't forget the anti-Blackness too.
Of course. But
yeah.
I feel like Muslims are a little bit more open to, I haven't run into a lot of anti-Blackness, but I have run into when we try to organize in and kind of mobilize people from the masjids, then all of a sudden, I don't know if we can, that goes against our beliefs. So there becomes a lot of, division within Muslims on that topic. So how are you going to navigate that?
Yeah. The way that I would rephrase the question is, how am I going to continue to navigate that? Because I've been part of that community for a couple of decades and have been having to navigate this issue for a long time. Before I ever got involved in electoral politics, one of the principal, principal communicative pieces were challenging anti-Blackness in that community, challenging misogyny in the community, and being one of the few Muslim intellectuals with classical training to challenge the homophobia inside the community and to make it a moral and ethical issue that is about contributing to an environment that actually produces violence against LGBTQ communities, and that, in point of fact, none of what we're asking for in terms of collective solidarity has anything to do with the way that you reckon the rules of your personal faith. What it has everything to do with is being willing to stand for other folks having the exact same rights that you would guarantee for yourself. So that's a fight that I've been taking on inside the community before there was ever an electoral political component for it. Was happy to take those bullets then, happy to take the bullets now. And there can be a kind of perception around religious conservatism for the Muslim community. In point of fact, polling indicates every time that amongst regular church-going religious practitioners, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, or otherwise, Muslims have the most progressive views regarding the LGBT community of any religious community in the United States. And that's something that is, systematically ignored and usually glossed over. So I don't conceive of it as a more fundamental problem when dealing with my community than it is with dealing with others. But it is something that it needs consistent communication, and that's something that I did during the presidential campaign. And it's something that I'm going to continue to do because there is no liberation without collective liberation. And as a primary community of belonging for me, and a place where my voice carries a certain weight in the conversation, I'm going to make sure that I always do that. Like, there's a piece that hasn't come out yet. I know a lot of people saw the one I did with Katie Halper, or the recent one, the werewolf one with Brianna Joy Gray. I just did another one for Thinking Muslim, where I tackled this issue directly in the questions that were asked. So the thing that I'll just say is the Muslim community did get over themselves on this particular point and voted in majority for the Green Party in 2024. But there are always going to be reactionary forces inside any of our religious communities that are going to be trying to foreclose conversations that are about actual collective liberation. And those of us that stand for it always have to be ready to pick up our arms again anew and to fight those fights. Like, there is no one time winning that conversation and then not having to come back to it. It's a conversation that we have to be willing to stand and fight on day by day, interaction by interaction. And it's my job as somebody that's inside that community to tackle that issue. That's the best answer that I can give you. There's no quick fix. It's just going to be a lot of freaking work.
Yeah,
Because to be perfectly honest, I'm married to a Mexican American woman, and inside the Latino community, you see a lot of conservative ideas, and people being persuaded by certain kind of rhetoric around social conservatism to side with political conservatism on the basis of that. And part of the conversation that I've been trying to craft is that this is not about your culture war, and that the culture war is actually just something that's designed to make sure that everybody's rights get taken away, and that it's not really about who you pray with or who you lay with. It's about having all of your basic fundamental rights respected, irrespective of who you are. And that messaging works. It just takes time, and I can't be the only one doing it. There have to be, intellectuals embedded in communities that are also taking up that fight. And some do, some don't, and some are going to have to get dragged, kicking and screaming to collective liberation.
Right, right. And I think that's just an ongoing challenge of dealing with an uneducated citizenry in terms of not understanding that a lot of the homophobia is rooted in colonialism, right? And going back to indigenous cultures, having just us not learning about that is what creates the challenge, and then it's weaponized, right? So
Well said, well said. And
yeah,
thank you,
thank
and
you.
thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Hi, everybody. Can't let Professor Ware end the course on time. This 2 hours yesterday was like miraculous. Usually we go over like an hour or 2 hours. I would like to shine light on the piece of this for people that are maybe a little more new. Um, which Professor Ware is talking about with us has to do with universalities that I'll just say some words to. Role model, integrity, hypocrisy, humility, perseverance, and heart work.
Mm.
Heart work. And I think that's what a lot of us feel, that I feel. And it's a privilege to be alive at this time. It's a privilege to be in this space with all of you. Um, though there are horrors and tyrannies in existence, it's pretty amazing to be breathing air today and being a participant, being potentially an active participant, bringing others, tethering with other hearts through this. And the whole thing with integrity is matching your heart and thoughts to action, manifestation, to make evidence, to show instead of tell. Um, and it's a privilege to just be here with all of you. So I wanted to ask an invitation to Professor Ware if he would share a little bit about his chapelet prayer beads. Because he said something about them a few years ago that really was profound as far as weaponry, the pen, the pew pew, and our heart's alignment and our consciousness of where we are in time and space in this short time we get on the planet.
Thank you for this. So, to provide some context, I did my first spiritual intensive talking about the relationship between spirituality and social justice in the Islamic tradition, and specifically in the West African Sufi tradition, in 2020, a week after George Floyd was murdered, because the community that I knew would listen, despite the fact that I'd never had a social media account before that week, was the one that I had been teaching to face for a couple of decades. And I mean, it was one of 300 people that signed up for that first spiritual intensive. I'm not sure when Morella joined, but it was shortly thereafter. It was definitely within year one. It might have been the second or third. So there are a few people that are in this space that have been here when this was only a conversation really inside a particular spiritual community. So I appreciate being called in to speak. Um, Straight to the heart of the matter. It was where I was going to end today anyway. The most powerful weapon for our collective liberation is neither the ballot nor the bullet. The most powerful weapon for our collective liberation is our heart. The functioning, sound, compassionate, tender, open, spiritually connected human heart is the most powerful instrument in the universe. It is the basis of all of our revolutionary struggle. It's the reason why we would risk shedding our lives for blood for our brothers and sisters in humanity. And it's the reason why we would pray that we wouldn't have to. It's the reason why we choose to take a peaceful path if one is open to us. Because ultimately, that instrument that is inside your breast is where all liberation begins and where it all ends. It's the reason why Malcolm is not just my guide to the Black liberation tradition, but Malcolm brought me to Islam, the tradition that brought my spirituality into being, that reconditioned my heart after all of the trauma that white supremacy and empire and poverty and capitalism had inscribed on me. Protect your heart. If you find yourself becoming hard-hearted, even towards your enemies, shield yourself against it. You do not know which one of those adversaries like is just a change of heart away from becoming an instrument of transformational change themselves. You don't know. And all of the only reason why I take on this weight is because I sincerely believe at the core of my being that every single human heart is worthy of redemption, whether they would accept it or not, whether that they would own it or not, that if I could give them a taste of what liberation actually feels like, not being tethered to oppression, not needing inequality and injustice in order to create your sense of self or in order to earn your living, I would free everyone from that prison if I could. I know I won't be able to, but I would if I could. So protect your heart from hard-heartedness. Not everybody in here is a person of faith, but across all of our traditions of faith and philosophy, we have ways of anchoring and rooting ourselves against the darkness that will emerge inside us if we abandon mercy, if we abandon compassion, if we abandon hope. Do not give in to the darkness in this moment. Instead, as Amina pointed out, understand that despite the darkness, the clouds that surround us in this moment, which are brutal, we've witnessed genocide, we're witnessing escalating genocides in multiple places. People are being snatched out of our own communities. Darkness is descending upon us. But when I read the Quran cover to cover in one night, the night after reading Malcolm's autobiography, cover to cover in one night, the Quran has this formulation that our job as people of peace is to guide humanity out of the darknesses and towards the light. The darknesses are always plural. The light is always singular. We are that light. If the light in your breast stays on, and as soon as it dims, as soon as it goes down, as soon as it is no longer capable of feeling compassion or empathy, as soon as you no longer weep for the harms that are being committed against your siblings in humanity, all is lost. Protect your heart first and foremost. But the difference between simply being a tradition of spirituality, one where you try to get connected vertically, whatever that might mean for you, or you try to protect your heart, the difference between that selfish, individualistic spirituality and true faith is that true faith is accompanied by action in the world. You are faithful whether or not you believe in God. If you take action for justice in the world, you are amongst the faithful. Because faith comes through action, faith comes through deed. It is not about words, it is not about feelings, it is about taking action. If you say that you actually have compassion and mercy for the people that are suffering in our own communities and on this planet, then what are you willing to put at stake to fight for them? Are you willing to spend Are you willing to spend of your treasure? Are you willing to spend of your time? Are you willing to spend of your talent, or is it talk? Amina started with where I'm going to end. I didn't know that this was where I was going to end, but all of those West African Sufi leaders that Doug had me writing about eventually in Jihad of the Pen, they all believed that they were preparing for a cosmic struggle. They believed that the end of days just might find them. And they didn't fear for this. They saw it as an opportunity to show what was inside them, to prove to themselves and to the God that they believed to be watching that they were worthy as human beings, that when the hour was the darkest, that they would stand up and fight for what's right. When the hour was the darkest. So give thanks to be born in such a dark hour, because we have an opportunity in this moment as empire is collapsing. And that was the other truth across those traditions. Doesn't matter the faith, doesn't matter the secular philosophy. They all say it in their own words. All empires fall. All empires fall, and this one will be no different. As this one is crumbling, we have an opportunity to show who we are and to show what we're worth and to build an alternative so that what replaces the ashes of this empire is the first free society that humanity has known in some time. I know people get weirded out by spirituality and cosmic talk, but I would not be undertaking this fight. I would not be running for office if I didn't believe that at the core of my being, that first domino falling on June 2nd is the first one to fall that ends with us all getting free. Because we're closer than you can possibly imagine. Humanity cannot continue destroying its environment in this way. Humanity cannot continue destroying one another in this way. Humanity cannot continue eroding human dignity in this way. It's not a thing that can happen. It is inevitable that this will and must end, but we must take action to assure that it is ended. This empire is ended in a way that brings in a new era of peace and mercy and abundance, because the reality is that without capitalism in the way, without imperialism in the way, without white supremacy in the way, that humanity has every single thing that it needs to provide for mountains of abundance for every single living human being and every single generation to be born after this for hundreds of generations. We produce many, many times more than what we need to consume, but the way that it is divided is hopelessly irrational, wasteful, violent, dangerous, exploitative, and destructive. We are only a shift in consciousness away from ending capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy forever, for putting them in the rear view mirror of human history. It's closer than any of you think. I'll end the way that Malcolm often did. Any good in this gathering was by the grace of God. Only the mistakes were mine. So I humbly beg your pardon for all of the times that I didn't say the right thing, that I didn't answer the question the right way, or for the questions that I left unanswered. I look forward to building with you guys in struggle. I hope to find each and every one of you helping to build this, not just this campaign, but this movement. And for those of you who are prayerful people, send a prayer for your brother. For those of you that aren't prayerful people, send all the good vibes and good energy that you can. We are taking all of it. And I look forward to seeing you guys either in the next in-person gathering or the next virtual gathering. Peace and power to you all.